Hello, this is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager at Horner. Thanks for joining us for another Tuesday live stream. Well, we've got a big treat for you today. No, we're not going to dive into the bits and the bytes of the Horner OCS all-in-one controller. We're not going to investigate the latest protocol on Ethernet for industrial applications. What we are going to do today is we are going to tell application stories with my friend and colleague, Jim Hausch. So Jim is an automation professional like myself. Like me, he's been around the block a few times, and we've got a lot of stories to tell. So we're going to have fun today talking with Jim. And without further ado, let me bring Jim in. So how are we doing today, Jim?
Good, Chuck. How are you?
Doing great. So tell us what you're doing these days in the automation world.
Well, so I've been with Powermation. It'll be 24 years in January. Started in 2000,
Uh-huh.
and just generally keeping busy and great getting out and seeing customers again, which we couldn't do there for a little while, and
Right.
diving into applications, which is the fun part of this job.
Absolutely. So we had Andrew on a few weeks ago, Andrew Jagger from the
hmm
Powermation St. Paul office. Tell us a little bit about Powermation while you're at it.
So, Powermation's an upper Midwest regional distributor, a
Mm-hmm.
high-tech automation distributor.
Mm-hmm.
I think we're at about 205 employees, maybe,
Mm,
and 60 salespeople on the
okay.
road, covering Minnesota, Wisconsin, Northern Illinois, Iowa, Dakotas, a little bit of Nebraska, UP. So call it a super regional
Right.
automation distributor.
Very cool. And by chance, or not by chance, Powermation is the largest Horner distributor in the United States. So we've had a good partnership over the years.
Absolutely. I tell people that Horner's like family.
You bet. You bet. And that's absolutely true of Powermation as well. So whereas Andrew was, his primary responsibility is, he's a technical resource for Powermation when it comes to controllers. You're primarily out there selling automation. Is that right?
Yeah, I am. I'm a outside salesperson, but
Mm-hmm.
what's unique about Powermation is we don't have a ton of Andrews, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's not a whole bunch of application support people, and Powermation expects the salespeople to be competent at the products and recommendations that they're making.
Mm-hmm.
And for better or for worse, I enjoy the technology, and I
Right.
sometimes get a little deeper into things than I probably should, but I just can't help myself.
Right.
So I really enjoy that part of the business. Is even though I'm outside sales, I like being the person that the customers can run the technical questions through, and then of course when I get hung up or if I need a verification, I contact Tim and the guys in your tech
That's
support
right.
group, and they back us up. And then if Tim doesn't respond fast enough, then I text you.
Absolutely. And if Tim doesn't respond fast enough, it's because Tim is a little behind. Okay.
Right.
Let's talk now. Let's start going to the Wayback Machine. So you don't necessarily have a traditional background that ended up, in automation. So how did you get started in automation?
So I was starting in 1992. I started working on private yachts. I started out as a first mate and eventually got my captain's license. I'd grown up boating on Lake Erie with my dad,
Uh-huh.
and I ended up as first mate on this 72-foot boat owned by a chemical company that would entertain customers and employees in the summertime, and enter you know basically used by senior management in Florida in
Mm-hmm.
the wintertime. And so I did that, and then I ran another boat for a family out of Houston,
Mm-hmm.
and that was Florida and the Bahamas. And then I ran a boat for a gentleman from Mexico who had a hotel. He had hotels in Monterey and in Cozumel, and I ended up living in Cozumel for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I ended up working for somebody who had sold his manufacturing business in Milwaukee.
Okay.
And he was met him in Florida, and I was working for this gentleman, and the majority shareholder of Powermation and him were friends.
Okay.
And he came down for a visit, and in the visit, uh, he had said to me, he goes, your job, you're very technical
Mm-hmm.
because these boats are like, there's engines, there's electronics,
Mm-hmm.
there's generators, there's plumbing systems, and while I'm not fixing everything all the time, I'm supposed to know how it all works, and then plus you're a host.
Right.
to the owner and their guests. And he said, "You're technical and you're personable. You would probably be good at this job. So if you
Mm-hmm.
ever decided to get out of it,
Mm-hmm.
uh, give me a call." And so that's what I ended up doing.
Nice.
And at the time, I was dating somebody from Chicago who we're now married. We got married in 2002, so
Uh-huh.
married 21 years, and I've been at Powermation ever since.
Wow.
So very non-traditional start.
Talk about a non-linear approach to getting into the automation business. And that's
Hmm.
one thing that people need to realize, and that is that, I had a very linear approach. I went to engineering school and I, interned at a manufacturing plant and I was a field applications engineer and I joined a PLC manufacturer. So that's kind of the traditional approach. But, for those who are interested in a particular field, you don't necessarily have to tick all the boxes to get involved in that if you have some of the things that people are looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't even know this sort of a job existed,
Mm-hmm.
right? And it's very not traditional in a sales aspect.
Right.
And I met, we're actually involved with the first high school robotics program.
Hmm.
And we even had some first interns, which Don,
Mm-hmm.
another Powermation guy, a long time
Right.
friend of everybody. And he did a wonderful job. We had some interns from the first high school robotics teams.
Mm-hmm.
And when I interact with them and I interact with the teams, it's good to expose them to this possible career, which is,
Right.
oddly enough, we have found that there are a couple of schools that do have technical sales programs, Iowa State being one of them,
Nice.
and I think Texas A&M having another,
Okay.
where it's been a good source of people for us. But to just introduce the fact that this job is out there, and if you like to tinker and you like how things work, and
Mm-hmm.
it's an interesting way, and you're gregarious, it's a
Right.
good way to make a living.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go back to, let's say, 2000-ish, or 2002, whenever you started at Powermation. You're green, right? I mean, you're just getting into
Oh,
the
yeah.
industry, about as green as it gets. So what was your first exposure to, let's say, PLCs? What was your
All
first
right.
exposure to that?
So I went through a Horner training class put
Mm-hmm.
on for customers and employees, and it was taught by a guy named Ed Nachel. You remember
Oh, I
Ed?
remember Ed. Absolutely.
Yeah. So it was taught by and I truly I don't know what I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
and I literally I'm like, so wait a minute, what's binary? Was the kind of questions I was asking.
Right, right.
And Ed, to his credit, said, well, it's a base two number system, and he kind of sketched it out on the board.
Mm-hmm.
It was a class of maybe a half a dozen people,
Right.
so he could take the time to do it. And so I went through this Horner training class where we worked with the mini OCS, right?
Mm-hmm.
The keys in the 2x20 text display,
Right.
and got exposed to Seascape, and uh, you know, learned about how ladder logic and PLCs and and in this case the PLC HMI worked,
Right.
and that was my first exposure to it.
Cool. And then later on, I'm sure you probably did training for all, sensors and traditional
Hmm.
PLCs and those sorts of things. So was it a little strange starting with an OCS and then getting trained on a PLC?
Yeah, yeah. The two things that stand out are that you go then to a traditional PLC class,
Mm-hmm.
and the HMI is an entirely separate program. And
Mm-hmm.
at the time, there was no such thing as shared tag databases.
Right.
So you're writing these programs and getting these things to talk to each other. And I'm like, this is horrible. Why would anybody ever do it like this when this other option is available?
Right.
And then the other thing, and I, because I don't come from a, computer science background,
Mm-hmm.
what's always impressed me about Horner is when you save a program or you send a program to somebody, it is a single file.
Mm-hmm.
And in other PLC worlds and PLC and HMI, there are these projects that have to
Right.
be packaged in a special way to send to somebody.
Right.
And then the fact that how far back for this free software package for Seascape,
Mm-hmm.
how far back you can go, grab a program, open it, change the hardware target, download it, and have it work.
Sure.
Being exposed to other places where that doesn't work
Sure.
really makes you appreciate how great Seascape is.
Right. Now that's something we really strive for. So I appreciate that you've noticed. That's a good thing. All right, very cool. Okay, so over the the course of your career, we've spent a fair amount of time together visiting new
Hmm.
customers, prospects that didn't become customers because I'm a lousy sales guy in some cases. But anyway,
Never.
we've had some adventures together. But the one that sticks out for me is the time we needed to do I guess we would call it a service call
Hmm.
with a manufacturer that was one of your customers in your area,
Hmm.
kind of in the dead of the night. So set that one up. What was going on at that particular application?
So that was the customer where we had worked with them and signed an NDA, and they had developed a custom C-scan node,
Mm-hmm.
and it was dust and mist collection equipment.
Mm-hmm.
And these nodes operated gates and picked up data from running machines to and talked back to a main controller to run the system.
Mm-hmm.
And this particular large system, we needed a repeater,
Mm-hmm.
and you guys used to make a repeater, and then I think due to component availability, stopped making that repeater
Right.
and had made a recommendation to me
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, this is what we're using now.
Mm-hmm.
So I bought one, tried it, it didn't work, and I said, Chuck, I'm dying here. You got to help me out.
All right.
And you came up, and we went there late at night when production wasn't happening, and
Right.
we troubleshooted the system and got the right component going and off and running.
Yeah. So let me give the user some background there. So what this was a manufacturer that did a lot of welding. That was the plant we were in, right? There was welding
Hmm.
stations all over the place. And the
Hmm.
system that we were working on was a system that your customer had sold them that basically kind of vented all the gases and all the smoke and all that kind of stuff, right?
Hmm.
And so like
Every weld cell had a
right,
there was the normal collection system.
right,
Every weld cell had a gate and an input saying, "Hey, there's welding happening here. Open
right,
this gate. Make sure the fan is running."
right.
And to this customer's credit, uh, the the development of this system was resulted in huge energy savings for the
Mm-hmm.
customer
Right,
because you're not running these 100 horsepower fans all out all the time,
right.
and we had the ability to open vents as needed to get the airflow needed. And C-scan was perfect for that
Right.
because it was a multi-drop network
Right.
of air ducts,
Mm-hmm.
and this was a multi-drop network of nodes.
Right. And C-SCAN was really developed. Give a little history lesson here for those of us who are watching. C-SCAN was developed for the U.S. Post Office, a big project we did called the Tray Management System, where you would literally, and literally, we're not exaggerating here, you would have some networks of 200 Horner controllers all daisy chained together running a conveyor system. And uh, anytime you have that many nodes on a network, or if the distances are really long, or if it's really noisy, you potentially need repeaters to kind of
Mhm.
reframe the messaging and make sure that the messages are clean all the way from end to end. And like you mentioned, we had always sold a repeater, manufactured, designed and manufactured by Horner, that we used for the post office. I mean, to get you some scale, we sold 35,000 controllers and several thousand of these repeaters to the post office over the years. But
Mhm.
right before this application, we had to obsolete that repeater because the chip that was it was based on just couldn't get it anymore. So this was not my best moment as a product manager. So I knew you needed something quickly. I went out and found a repeater, and I said, "All right, this should work. Jim, install it." And as you said, you installed it, and it didn't work. So
Correct.
yeah. So what it turns out, and I had tested it on the bench. I connected it to 500 meters of cable and that sort of thing. But what it turned out was that it really wasn't one. It wasn't didn't seem like it was effectively reframing the messages. And another contributing factor was it wasn't optically isolated. So a lot of times, if you've got a really long network, you can have noise that will kind of travel along the network, or you'll have a scenario where one end of the network has a different voltage potential than the other end of the network.
Mhm.
So in that scenario, you really want to optically isolate the network into different segments and then interconnect the segments optically, right? And that
Mhm.
wasn't happening. So as soon as we got you the right optical repeater,
Mhm.
then things worked a lot better, right? But wasn't
Yeah,
there?
except it was okay. If we're going to try this again, I'd
right?
like you to be here, Chuck.
Well, sure. And I think at the about a week before I went up for the trip, I think I had this panic attack thinking, "Oh my gosh, what if this repeater isn't isolated?" And so I think I brought up an isolated one with me because I think
Oh,
at that
okay.
point I had figured out that uh-oh, I may have recommended the wrong one. But ultimately, it was noise kind of that was causing issues, and they were using unshielded flat cable, which was
Mhm.
contributing. Um, but ultimately, what was the cause of the noise? Do you remember?
The root cause was the drive was injecting noise
Mm-hmm.
onto the network
Mm-hmm.
through the comms cable connection between the drive and the OCS.
Right.
So we had there's sort of two things that I want to mention. Uh, when you have an OEM
Mm-hmm.
and the OEM is building a panel or a machine over and over again,
Right.
they're not reading the directions anymore, right? It's, as you know, it's tough enough to get
Right.
somebody to read the directions in the first place, but
Sure.
usually, once something's happening, you're not looking at it. And
Right.
this particular drive manufacturer uh, had added a supplement that said, "Oh, by the way, you better tie 0 volts of the control board to the chassis because we found we're throwing a bunch of noise on
Mm-hmm.
these frame sizes onto the board."
Right.
And I discovered that, and boy, that changed a lot of the issues we were having.
Right.
But it was ultimately the drive was the core, but of course the repeater would
Mm-hmm.
fix it downstream. The repeater didn't repeat noise.
Right.
And to the credit of C-Scan, it worked in an incredibly noisy environment and self-recovered and kept going, and
Mm-hmm.
it was great. But the other side of it is another customer of mine, an integrator, panel builder, and one of the folks who, if there isn't a specification, they'll use an OCS.
Mm-hmm.
They'll say, hey, if there's not a hard vendor specified, or if the customer is looking to innovate or move their panel from, I'll joke here and say, from the 90s to the early 2000s, right,
Okay. Sure.
and get a PLC, the they'll say, hey, the OCS would be a good candidate here. That customer, the reason I'm mentioning it is they told me early in my career that you're not going to be judged by how you behave when everything goes right.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't going to call you up and say, boy, that worked perfect, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be judged on how you behave and how you respond when things don't go right. And
Yeah.
that was a perfect example. It wasn't working and we got it working.
Yep.
So
It's always good. And just to button that story up a little bit, I remember two things non-work related for that particular trip. One was you were kind enough to let me stay in your guest bedroom because
yeah.
was it 3 a.m. or 2 a.m. that we had to be there? What was it?
Yeah. It was, yeah. I said we got to leave and get there in the middle of the night, so you might as well stay here, and
Absolutely.
that was
And
fun. That was
it
great.
was great. And Jim at the time had his guest room was in above his garage, and his garage was separate from the house. So it was almost my own little apartment. So that was awesome.
So
Um,
we had bought a place out in the country and built a garage with an apartment above it. Lived there, donated the house to the fire department. They burned it down for training, and then I general contracted that house,
uh-huh.
and so then that's where you'd stayed. And we sold that place in 2015, but that was,
It,
yeah, that was a neat
it
place.
was great. And then the last thing I remember was after we were all done and things were looking up, we went and had a great breakfast at the Cracker Barrel at like 6 a.m. or something.
Right, yeah, and that was the end of our day.
Yeah, that was the end of our day, right? Okay, so we'd put in our 6 hours or 8 hours or whatever it was, and we were good to go. Okay, very
Right.
cool. Yeah, that's definitely a memory. Okay, so besides selling, that system, you've been
hmm
involved in a bunch of other systems and a bunch of other industries as well. So just give us kind of a flavor of some of the customers and some of the industries that you've been involved in.
Well, it is amazing how diversified the manufacturing environment is in the upper Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
I've got customers, OEMs, and end users in all kinds of markets, right?
Mm-hmm.
Printing,
Mm-hmm.
and we've used some OCSs talking to drives and that in there. And we've done, uh, back when the NX came out,
Mm-hmm.
that was a real communication powerhouse, and we
Mm-hmm.
used that as on Profibus and Ethernet and discrete I/O for a customer in the printing world.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, since this is Wisconsin, I have a customer that makes machines that processes cheese.
Of course.
So yeah, some with them, and custom machine builders. And I have an OCS customer that does blast wheel equipment and peening, which
Hmm.
is throwing shot at parts to clean them up after
Okay.
casting or doing surface treatment of parts. And they are they're a fantastic Horner OCS customer, and he's one of your Canvas beta folks right now too.
Nice. Nice.
So they're great to work with. That's been a fun company.
Yeah. Now I remember again, I took when I was in college, I took a class called Manufacturing Processes, which was kind of fun. And I
Hmm.
think we learned a little bit about what you call that peening?
Shot blasting and peening. Shot
Peening.
blasting is to clean the parts,
Right.
and peening actually treats the surface and is a form of hardening,
Right.
form of case hardening.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was freshman year, though, of engineering school. So that was a long time ago. I'll definitely say that. Okay. Very cool. Now, I seem to remember, since I'm a train guy, and a lot of people don't know I love trains, my favorite way to travel is a passenger train and a sleeper. Didn't you have a customer that was doing some sort of railroad applications as well?
Yes, a customer that makes equipment for what are referred to as hump yards,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a yard where they're taking apart and putting together trains
Mm-hmm.
uh, to move on to the wherever the next destination is, and they call it a hump yard because they push the car over a hump and it slides down, and then they have switches that direct it into spurs to build the trains up,
Mm-hmm.
and they're using an OCS to control the speed of the train as it heads towards that diverting section. Yeah,
Awesome.
and they buy the dash 22 version with the built-in heater
Right.
because they've got stuff in very bad environments, very cold places.
Right. Cool. Okay. So, of all the applications that you've dealt with over the years, what would you say is the most fun or the most unusual one that you've run across?
So the most unusual one is uh, it was a jet ski paraglider. It was a customer that ended up with a DARPA project
Okay.
where the goal was to create a jet ski with an autopilot that
Okay.
could deploy a soldier on a parachute via a winch, like parasailing down on vacation, like people who go parasailing, but this is a square steerable chute.
Right.
And the idea was he'd be able to get up to 1,500, 2,000 feet, cut loose, fly to the beach, and the jet ski would go back to the ship. And the OCS and using some integrated servo motors, what we controlled the winch system, where
Mm-hmm.
we would pay out at a given speed or tension
Mm-hmm.
and draw it back in. But I'll send you some pictures of the old aluminum housing, outdoor visibility OCS and the side of this box that
Right.
sits on the back of a hacked up jet ski and was used for doing that thing. I remember, you know, this guy was down in Arizona sitting in the back of a pickup truck towing a trailer across a playa, uh, and trying to get this thing to work. And that was by far the most interesting project I'd ever worked on. I don't think that's gone anywhere, or if it has, it's top secret. But
Right.
that was the most bizarre project I'd
There
ever
you go.
worked on.
Top secret until today, at least, right?
Yes, until today. And I
Exactly.
actually called a guy and I said, "Can I talk about this?" And he said,
Uh-huh.
"Yeah, yeah, you can talk about it. That's fine."
Okay, very
So,
good. You know that we've run into the craziest applications. I mean, here's a couple more for you. I mean, uh, we are involved in mechanical bulls, like at Honky Tonks in Texas.
mhm.
So we have an OEM that makes that stuff. I think another Powermation salesman was involved in a some sort of mechanical horse that was built on like an ATV frame, and it was programmed to effectively herd cattle or something. Where do they come up with these things? But it's always a lot of fun in the automation world, no question about that. Well,
Well, the equipment that we sell
mm-hmm,
is sometimes you'll run into these edge use cases,
mm-hmm,
and you'll get somebody thinking they need to design a circuit board, or they're
mm-hmm,
trying to figure out, how do I do this?
mm-hmm.
And we've got 130 vendors on our line card.
Sure.
There's a handful of off-the-shelf components that you could say, you don't need to. If you're just doing one of these, don't design a circuit board.
Right.
Let's use some parts to build this up, or you use an OCS to get the customer from 0 units a year
Mm-hmm.
to 1,000 units a year.
Right.
And then when they go beyond that, now it's okay. Is this the right choice to continue forward?
Right.
But I was worried when I came into this business about the level of engineering knowledge I would need.
Mm-hmm.
And there is so much engineering already inside everything we touch
Mm-hmm.
that, you're just standing on the shoulders of the next guy
Right.
solving applications.
Sure. Cool. So usually when you're involved in these applications, you're advising, you're recommending, but ultimately your customers are usually the ones doing the programming and kind of doing all the details. But I remember that you kind of put a system together yourself at one point somewhat recently. Tell us about that.
So there's a couple of things is when people like to use what they're comfortable with.
Mm-hmm.
And so as a salesperson, one of my jobs is to get somebody comfortable in Seascape.
Mm-hmm.
And a training class is one thing, but once you
Mm-hmm.
get to your first application, hey, why isn't this working? What do I do here? What do I
Sure.
do here? And I've sat with them, I've seen what they're trying to do, and I can usually get them through different parts of it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the one thing about your platform is the way you guys have done Modbus
Mm-hmm.
is you've the way I look at it is you've Modbus ultimately the bits that are going over the wire or
Mm-hmm.
the bits that make up the message in the Modbus TCP packet
Mm-hmm.
are the same, but every manufacturer makes their own version of here's how we implemented Modbus.
Mm-hmm.
And they might say function calls and addresses that start at zeros, or it might be the Modicon method. They might swap words. They
Mm-hmm.
might not do they might not support, like we ran into one where they wouldn't support a single holding register
Okay.
function call. They just didn't support it. So
Right.
everything had to be a multiple, even if you're only asking for one.
Mm-hmm.
And your Modbus implementation is such that if you need to figure out how to talk to somebody's equipment that talks Modbus,
Mm-hmm.
far and away, Horner's the easiest to do. And I've used it. I've carried a Horner in to prove to somebody, yes, this Modbus is fine. Here, I can get this working in
Right.
30 minutes. And yes, we're exchanging data. We're all set. So one of our other vendors, Banner, who
Mm-hmm.
you guys are partnering on the IO-Link stuff,
Sure.
they built these devices for put to light and pick to light applications,
Mm-hmm.
and they did a version of Modbus that they call Pick IQ.
Mm-hmm.
And when they came out with that product, I immediately wanted to figure out how it worked.
Mm-hmm.
And as I got further and further down the rabbit hole, I said, well, let's just build a little platform that somebody could easily make, up to 100 location pick to light system. And so that's why I built that Pick Logic system.
Very cool.
That was a lot of fun.
Awesome. And for those who aren't familiar, describe just briefly what a pick-to-light system is.
So a pick to light system guides somebody during an assembly process by you have a rack in front of them with bins, and a light would turn on, and and in this case you can have a number or some basic text next to the light saying pick 2 from here,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can pick and acknowledge that they made the pick, and it's just a guide. It accelerates training, and put to light's the idea of I'm putting orders together. So we just put in some large VLM machines in our warehouse in Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
And as these machines bring trays and they pick objects out of them, they turn around and they put to light, so
Okay.
this goes in this box, this goes in that box. But that's what pick to light. And the PTL 110
Mm-hmm.
is the Banner product that
Nice.
that I worked with. It was a lot of fun.
Awesome. Okay. Well, it's been a lot of fun talking with you about business, but let's talk a little bit about one thing that you do on your, on your off time, and that is you're a private pilot, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I got my license in the 90s back when I was doing the boat thing. And then when I changed careers in 2000 and came to Wisconsin, I was poor because I was starting over again. And,
right.
And so I kind of had to give up the idea of flying.
Mm-hmm.
And in 2015, when we sold that house that you had seen, and
Mm-hmm.
we moved to a different place, so I was able to get back into it. And so since 15, mid 16, I've been back
Mm-hmm.
into it and having a lot of fun. I just this past weekend flew. The EAA has a thing called Young Eagles, where kids can come take a
Mm-hmm.
free airplane ride and get a little logbook and
Cool.
access to an EA membership. And there was a Young Eagles event nearby, and so this past weekend I flew. I think it took 11 kids for their the first airplane ride. So it was a lot of fun.
That's very cool. Awesome. Well, Jim, it's been a lot of fun having you with us today. I'm looking forward to my next trip to Wisconsin so we can actually see each other in person again. I don't think I've seen you more than a couple times since COVID. Not as often as I'd like, though, for sure.
Yeah, I would think the last time maybe when I came down for the advanced training with John. Yeah, visited that one. So
awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Great talking to you, Chuck.
Great talking to you as well. Take care, Jim.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
It sure was a lot of fun having that conversation with Jim today. I hope you enjoyed it. So this is the part of our program where we remind you that we're here every Tuesday at 2 o'clock, either fully live or pre-recorded, but we've always got folks standing by to answer any questions you have. And if you watch on replay, like a lot of you do, we'd love to see your comments and questions, and we'll reply to those just as soon as we can. So next week, we've got a live show from the Process Expo trade show in Chicago coming your way. So the big show in the second half of the year is absolutely Process Expo. We're going to be showing off a lot of new products, including Canvas. Remember, Canvas is scheduled for release at the end of the year, and things are looking good for Canvas and Seascape 10 release on that time frame. But if you want to see those things in person, come check them out at the Process Expo in Chicago. And if you can't make it in person, check out our show. Now, for those of you who have not subscribed to our channel yet, don't hesitate to do so. It doesn't cost anything. And if you choose notifications when you subscribe, you'll be notified every time we go live or every time we post a new video. Okay, so until next week, when we see you from the Process Expo show, let's all get out there and do us some good.